30 years ago, Steve Magnante wrote his first ever automotive article.
It was like, wow, yeah, I wrote this. It's cool, you know. So, and then from there, of course, it's always a thrill. It's like seeing your name up in lights, and standing outside of the theater and seeing, hey, that's me. It's Greta Garbo and me. It's a big thing in your own between your own ears, I suppose. But it is also, it's a thrill and a nice thing.
After 30 years in the industry, Steve has carved out a reputation for deep, detailed knowledge. He's written a few books, hosted Roadkill's Junkyard Gold, and contributed to just about every magazine out there. And he's built some cool stuff to back it up. Your love of cars and history really comes through in like the articles that you write and in your appearances on all the shows that you're in. How did it all start? Like, how did you first fall in love with cars and automotive history?
Yeah, well, it doesn't really make sense because, a lot of people say, well, I got it from my dad, got it from my mom. Well, my father was an optical physicist. He designed lenses for for anything from contact lenses to, there was this weird thing he helped out with. The nose of a missile flying at Mach 3 had a hole in the front. Inside that hole was a lens that was below the surface, but it could see left, right, up, and down. How the hell do you make a lens that can do that? I don't know. But he did things like that and manipulating light. My mom was a graphic artist, and her thing was designing menus and just business cards and things before the age of the computer. So dad passed like 15 years ago, mom back in 86. So I'm kind of an orphan, I shouldn't say. But my brother Dave is an eye surgeon in Indiana. And so my interest in cars pretty much came along like in fifth and sixth grade. We'd get home, my brother and I get off the school bus. Mom would have a Matchbox car waiting for David and I. And within 10 minutes, I had traded David a candy bar for his Matchbox car. So I got this collection going. He didn't really care about Matchbox cars. But Matchbox cars led to, and this would have been like 19, I was born in 1964, not 18. No, but so by 1970, I'm 6, and I started playing Matchbox cars. That's when that started. Matchbox cars led to Hot Wheels cars, Johnny Lightnings, which were then kind of revolutionary. And I remember kind of feeling that the British Matchbox with its little plastic button wheels was so old looking compared to these things from California, these Mattel Hot Wheels with mad wheels and red line tires and all that stuff. So, but anyway, the limitations of diecast toys were blown out of the water when I discovered plastic model car kits, which were larger, 1/25th scale, had engines, dual exhaust systems, mag wheels, options, superchargers, what? So like by 73, I'm about 9 years old and building model cars. And of course, right around that same time, 1973, we've got to remember that the OPEC oil crisis, 71-23, and the EPA, I mean, we need clean air and all that stuff, but it was the end of muscle as we knew it then. Who knew it would come back? But anyway, 1974, I'm 10, and I remember being with my mom in our Volvo station wagon, 122S, four-door automatic, and waiting to get 5 gallons of gas on alternate days. And depending, I think if you had an even or an odd number of your license plate or something like that, depending what day you get your gas. So to me, it was like the world was coming to an end. At that same time, I discovered a stack of old super stock hot rod, Carcraft, and High Performance Cars magazines in a buddy's garage. And they were only from 10 years earlier, the 60s. But in 74, they seemed like they were from some other planet. So I'm reading about GTOs and 442s, which I thought were 442s. I didn't realize it was a 442. And then I see this thing called a Hemi, a Max Wedge. And I realized, wait a minute, it seemed like Chrysler might be a little more serious with this stuff. And why did Jungle Jim and his Camaro have a Chrysler Hemi in it? What is up? So then I kind of realized, whoa, wait a minute, are these Hemis were street engines? So anyway, that became like learning about them through magazines and reading the works of Roger Huntington, Joe Oldham, Eric Dahlquist, guys at Hot Rod and stuff, and just the greats, and Ro McGonigal, who I would later work for at Hot Rod, So anyway, by 1981, 82, I graduated from high school, and my yearbook page actually has a picture of a Hemi from a buddy's Hemi Dart. It was like, well, he wasn't a buddy. I was like this 10-year-old geek would ride my bike by his garage with this red Dart standing out the front with Krager Super Trick wheels on it, big tires in the back, and a little Hemi emblem on the fender. So I know what that is. And I said, Darts, a Dodge Dart with a Hemi, they only made like a few of those things. Is this one of them? So he invited me, come on in. Turns out it was a 71 Hemi Cuda engine in a 69 3 Dart GTS. That was a street rat, but it was his drag car. So anyway, that led to, just a love for Mopars. So off I go to Clark University College, 1982 through 86, graduated in 86. And through all of that was building model cars. And yeah, bad getting the term papers done when I had time. Graduated with like C's. I wasn't a great student. So anyway, I get out of college in 86, and there was really nothing going on in rural Massachusetts. I'm like, wow. And the best job offer that the Clark Job Placement Office had was CVS Pharmacy's assistant manager trainee. So I thought, wow, this isn't so good. So I got a job at a Chevy dealership, actually, Ragsdale Chevrolet in Spencer, Massachusetts. They're gone now, but I was a salesman. One of the first jobs ever was selling cars, and that's when I learned. And I was 21. I wasn't very old enough to meet, greet, measure their feet, as they'd say, with customers ranging from some teenagers, but mostly older folks who I just couldn't relate to. I mean, you're 21, you're out of college, and what do you know about anything? So I sold 43 cars in the 6 months I was there, but I learned painfully that selling cars and liking cars are two very different things. So anyway, that led to, okay, I got to go to California. I want to either act or write for Hot Rod. And the acting thing, I did a little bit of acting in college, and it was interesting. So anyway, saved my pennies, my dimes, didn't buy a 409, but I paid off my student loans and went to California. But along the way, I got to say, from 1986 through about 1991, my grandma passed away and left me $10,000, which my dad thought I put into a savings account. No, I bought a 68 Chevy Charger for $10,000 when it was just starting to go crazy.
Oh man!
Running, driving, rolling restoration. It was in primer. It had headers, but it was ready, and it was running, driving car. So I used to street race the heck out of that thing. And when I say street race, we had a little spot in Palmer, Massachusetts, Route 67 between West Warren and Palmer, where there was nobody around. So we would meet there on Friday and Saturday nights and do dangerous things safely. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like Tokyo Drift, flying down the middle of the 405 freeway sideways with a Mack truck on the roof. It was just we'd make sure there was no cars around, and it was late at night, and it was dangerous things done safely. Put it like that. So yes, I've street raced, and it's whatever. I never got in trouble with it, but I always had Mopars. And then after the Hemi Charger, I had a 64 Dodge Polar, which I turned into a Max Wedge clone, sold that car, lost the $6,000 profit I made on the Hemi Charger. But through all of this stuff, got my hands real dirty, because in high school and into the first few years of college, my dad says, no cars for you until you graduate. So I did not come from an automotive household. Like I said, I was building models, and I still do, but basically did not have GTOs and Roadrunners in the driveway. My buddies had them, but I could not have a car, and I was frustrated. So I made up for that right after college. So anyway, knowing that having fun cars on the weekends and stuff, but having a crappy job at CVS Pharmacies was a problem. I said, I'm going to go to California. And like I said, either act, write, or become a human cannonball in the circus. No matter what it was going to be better than, retail. And that's all my English degree got me, was retail. So let's go to call it California. So I went out to LA in 1991, drove a Plymouth Volare station wagon. I'd sold everything. Student loan was paid off. I had like $2,000. I said, I'm going to go to California and stay 1 year. And if it sucks, I'll stay a year. If it doesn't, well, I'll come home and find out what I'm supposed to do. So 1 year became 17 years. And the funny thing is, when I got to California, I had already, in Massachusetts back in the late 80s, I used to go to outdoor swap meets at like Stafford Springs, with all these different shows, where 90% of the time it would rain, but I would sell old car magazines at these things and do pretty good, like Hot Rod, Carcraft, that stuff, for a couple bucks a piece. So I went to California with a bunch of boxes of old magazines in the back of my Plymouth wagon, with the idea that I was going to first and foremost arrive on time to hit the Long Beach swap meet at Veterans Stadium in California. Every month they put this thing on. And I went there, and I rolled into Southern California on a Saturday night around midnight. I slept in my car in Long Beach in the line of cars. And I read about it in the Good Guys Gazette, how to do the Long Beach swap meet. That day I was up at like 5 o'clock. The cars roll in, you set your stuff up by 7 o'clock and sell magazines. And I did about $400 in one day. I'm like, wow, this is good. So anyway, after the swap meet, I drove finally to my buddy's place in North Hollywood that same day. I went to the swap meet first, and then I touched down at the place I'm supposed to live at. And I ended up staying with my buddy Bruce for about 3 months. And then from there, moved from apartment to apartment. But on the second day in California, Monday, I called a bunch of magazines, Hot Rod, the receptionist didn't even listen to me. It was like, whatever. I'm thinking, well, how am I going to do this? So then I called a thing called Chrysler Power Magazine. in Azusa magazine. This guy named Roland Osborne picks up the phone, and what do you know? 3 years I worked for Roland at Chrysler Power. So that was my first magazine job. $100 a week. It was a small magazine. It's still around. Chrysler Power is still inching along. It was one of the first Mopar magazines. But so I worked there for 3 years, and that led to freelance work for Mopar Action, which is still alive and well. It's Cliff Gromer, Richard Ehrenberg, Dan Gallo, those guys are still around. And that led to Steve Collison seeing my stuff. And he was, of course, the editor of, at that point, Drag Racing Monthly, which was Superstock. And he said, can you do some tech? Sure. So I wrote a few things for Collison in Drag Racing Monthly. And that led to Ro McGonigal, the editor of Hot Rod, seeing those and stealing me, as Collison put it, away from drag racing. And then I went to Hot Rod. So I was at Hot Rod from August 19th, 1997 through January 20th, 2004, just about 7 years. And I was part of 77 issues of Hot Rod as the tech editor. I worked with Ro McGonigal, Ray Baskerville. He was just a great guy, good writer, and just didn't worry about wearing a tie and stuff. He'd wear sandals, and so it was an honor to work with Gray. And of course, Jeff Koch was there already, and Terry McGeehan arrived. And those guys are, of course, very much a part of the Hemmings dynasty today. And so, yeah, it was a wonderful 7 years spent at Hot Rod. So where does that bring us? I can keep going if you want.
Well, I mean, that's kind of something that a lot of people dream of, being an automotive journalist, and to be an automotive journalist in kind of a golden age. Gray Baskerville is a hero to, and I was a little kid reading the magazines. I didn't know who anybody was, but his articles always stuck out because they were always so crazy. The way that he wrote, I assumed the way that he talked. And, so to have worked with him, I mean, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah. It's funny. I look back on it, and who knew that on December 6th, 2019, no, not Pearl Harbor, that was a day later, but the magazine industry would summarily be executed, so to speak. That was the day that 135 people, were summarily dismissed. And what used to be Peterson Publishing, basically 19 of 22 magazine titles were eliminated in one day. And the crazy thing is, Carcraft, Rod and Custom, Muscle Car Review, Mopar Muscle, all of these magazines were unplugged without a farewell issue, which is weird, but it's business. I get it. And it was coming for a long time, but I would never have dreamt that would have happened when I was there at Hot Rod in 1998, when the magazines were still at their powers, and this weird thing called the internet was starting to nibble at its feet, but it's an evolution, and it's all continued. Hot Rod, Motor Trend, and Four Wheeler are the only three remaining magazines of the Peterson empire. But of course, the television and video aspect of it has mushroomed. So it's an evolution, and I'm happy to still work for that part too.
Yeah. I mean, and there is a difference between digital content and print, and that's something that it seems like we talk about a lot on our podcast. But seeing something in print is a different feeling. Do you remember the first time you saw one of your articles in print and what that felt like?
I do. I still have it. In fact, I'm kind of, I don't believe in astrology and all that kind of stuff, but I'm a Cancer, right? July 14th, right? So supposedly Cancers collect stuff. And I do. I'm kind of a sponge. Everything I do, I grab it. It comes with me in my life. So I have all the magazines I ever wrote, including doubles and triples, and even the tear sheets and pre-production, and even like the manuscripts. I have all that junk. I don't know why. But the first thing I ever wrote was for Chrysler Power magazine. It was a review of the old IMC model company Dodge L700 cab and trailer kit from like 1970. And it was like, wow, yeah, I wrote this. It's cool, So, and then from there, of course, it's always a thrill. It's like seeing your name up in lights and, standing outside of the theater and seeing, hey, that's me. It's Greta Garbo and me, or whatever, and it's a big thing between your own ears, I suppose. But it is also, it's a thrill and a nice thing. And so, yes, I do recall that, and still enjoy it when stuff comes out. I still write for All Chevy Performance magazine, which is one of the few, there's a subgroup of magazines that are still doing very well. They're just smaller, and something as massive as 10, which used to be Peterson, the Enthusiast Network, being so big like that, it's got to keep eating and growing and feeding. Whereas smaller little things with 20 guys or 5 guys making a magazine, it's much easier to weather storms. So there's a lot of little magazines still around for sure.
And it's one thing to see an article that you wrote in a magazine. It's another thing to see a car that you built on the cover. A lot of people, myself included, consider the Wilshire Shaker to be one of the greatest magazine project cars ever. And that was all you, right?
Well, yeah, oh, yeah, the Wilshire Shaker, sure. The wonderful thing about magazines, and you're not supposed to talk money, but I'm going to do it. When I started working in Chrysler Power, like I say, and here's the thing: if you want to get far in life, no matter what you do, be ready to work for free. Okay, volunteerism is a huge thing, but also know when to stop working for free, and that's something I still am not good at. But anyway, with that said, because I was working at Chrysler Power for $100 a week, and doing the swap meets on the weekend and making 2, 3, 4, $500 on my own, I didn't have to go and get a normal job someplace, at an insurance company or whatever, and give up my dream, so to speak. So I will say that anybody out there who wants to, do anything, be ready to, give it away for a while, see what you got, and then of course, and then the trick is to either get an agent and have representation, or have the nuts to ask for what you're worth. That's an important thing. But anyway, beyond all that stuff, the magazine world. Okay, so when I started Hot Rod Magazine, I thought to myself, well, I've been making about 20 grand a year, which is enough to get by. I got to get 30. I'm going to tell Ro I want 30 grand. So I go into Hot Rod. He goes, well, Steve, what's the number? What are you going to get? Well, Ro, I got to get 30 grand. He goes, how's 43 sound? You got me, which is to say he probably was ready to go 55. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but it's business. He had a budget to work with. So I started at $43,000 in 1997. And 7 years later, when I left, $43,000 is what I made, right? Because there were 4 ownership changes, and everybody was told, okay, folks, got to tighten our belts. So that stuff was going on. John Diana would come in and say, hey guys, we just got sold to Prime Media or whatever, mergers with the British company, with the British guys, forget the name, but anyway, so that was going on. But at the same time, one of the perks is being able to build project cars, right? So the bottom line with magazine project cars is you got to finish what you start. And we all know there's a long, not a junkyard, but a whole bunch of cars that started, never went anywhere. Like Superstock Magazine, Project 6-Pack back in 74.5 was a Roadrunner. This Ted Struce, I think was his name. He did a good job of that, but that was an early example of a magazine project car. Of course, Project X at Popular Hot Rod in that 57 Chevy, which was owned by the magazine, but in many cases, editors and writers can own their stuff. So it's wonderful, to be able to build a car for dimes on the dollar. And that was one of the perks. And that's what the Wilshire Shaker was. I will say this, I had about $23,000 into that car of my own money. And what I always did, I always paid for sweat. Anybody who's sanding, painting, welding, pay the guy. Whereas you could also call Gary Penn at Chevy High Performance. Gary, I need a 502. And sometimes you'd call him up, say, hey, Gary, he goes, what do you need? What do I ship it? Before he even said anything, because he knew that something getting into the pages of Hot Rod would make the phone melt, as he put it. So you'd get an engine at no charge, which was wonderful. Hillborn injection at no charge, wonderful. Our car would rebuild this push button torque light at no charge, wonderful. But I'd go into the junkyard, get the Imperial torque flight and pull it in, so you had to meet it halfway. But that was one of the lovely perks, being able to build cars at the magazine. So I thought to myself, instead of doing the usual thing, building just, a Camaro or something like that, I want to make a statement. I want to bring back the altered wheelbase car for the street. Now I wasn't the first guy to do that at all in the 80s. Brett and Terry Hayek, you might remember those people. They did Ford Cameras, and they were some of the first people who put AFX cars back on the map, Ford style. So anyway, I said, hey, Ro, why don't I build a project car in the magazine, not a gasser, but an altered wheelbase funny car? And there's a big difference. He goes, well, I like it. What do you want to do? Well, I'd love to find a 65 Belvedere or Coronet Post, put a Hemi in it. And he goes, you know what's going to happen with that, aren't you? Not a lot of parts for the Mopars, and readers may or may not care that much about the Mopar. Of course, Hot Rod, 70% GM, and I get that. So I said, I'll get a Nova. So Will Hansel, who was an editor at Hot Rod before I was there, was selling a 63 Nova 2-door, bought that for $800, rust-free roller. That's when you could buy those things for nearly nothing. And that became the basis for the Wilshire Shaker. Yeah. And that was 4 or 5 years in the making. And it was on the cover of Hot Rod in black guide coat primer at one point. And that was the only time I was on the cover because it wasn't quite done yet, but it was supposed to be done in a year, but it took 5. Like I say, I had a welder living on the other side of my fence. I lived in El Monte, California. And on the other side of the fence was a guy named Dale Cooch, who was a freelance welder. And I would just push the car into his garage, just throw $100 bills over the fence, and he'd just weld it, put the cage in it, do the subframes, whatever it might be. But I would sort of tell him, this is what I want, and he would make it happen. So so that was the genesis of the Wilshire Shaker. And when it was finally done, there was a little bit of pushback. I remember Jeff Smith, who I respect. He was a big Chevy guy, Chevy high performance, but he says, Steve, you're building your death trap. You're leading your readers wrong. They're going to build these cars and get killed in them. I said, well, Jeff, we're not going to go 8s in a car like that, but if it runs 12s, 11s, or even 10s, but is streetable, that's the bottom line. And the thing with an altered wheelbase car is that it's really, if you build it properly and the welding's good and stuff, there's nothing more dangerous about it than any other hot rod, really. And the altered wheelbase treatment is no different than tubbing a car. So I'd put my fate into a leaf spring than a Heim joint. In some cases, those things can break on a full length, and that's no fun. So it was fine. And of course, I would never tell anybody to go cornering or go up Mulholland Drive and try to make like James Dean in an altered wheelbase car or any kind of a car with a high center of gravity. So it was a wonderful experience. On the highway, it would cruise along at 80 miles an hour, no problem at all. 3-speed torque flight. I was thinking at first about putting a 4-speed or a 5-speed overdrive so I could cruise, and the idea was power torque with the Wilshire Shaker. But in the end, in those days, just before computers, the staffers were required to get the story of power torque. And the word was, if your car broke down, you were pushing it, you weren't doing your job, don't bring your car. So that kind of was a thing. Although some staffers did, and most of them paid the price when it blew up or broke.
Right.
So yeah, so that was the backbone of the Wilshire Shaker.
And you did actually run it. You raced it. It wasn't just a street driver. How fast did it go?
That's right. Well, it wasn't fast. It wasn't hellishly fast. It hit a 502 and in stock form. I think we put on the chassis down at like 310 rear wheel horsepower, and with the Hillborn. So we put a crane solid roller in it and stuff. We finally got, I think 420 at the tire, which was pretty good, 515 or whatever it is at the flywheel. And GM Performance puts very, very mild cams in those crate engines, or at least the 502, because they don't want it coming back, over 5,500 amp, it wouldn't go, and little tiny springs. So we made it so it would go $7,000, and it would then, I think the best ET I got out of that car was 1120s at 114, 15. And it was reasonable, and would do a wheel stand coming off the line. And it would do just enough of a wheel stand that you had to have your thumb on the second gear button. So right at 6,200 RPM, push 2, it would settle right down. If you didn't, and it went into either valve flow, which you didn't want, or if you push too late, it would come down harder. It never did anything ugly except broke the springs one time. That's another story in a few minutes if you want. But as a street car, it was wonderful. There was nothing wrong with it. Big, tall slicks on the back, and I drove on the street. There were those Mickey Thompson Raider. I think you guys might even sell those. I'm not sure. It's Speedway, but anyway, the Mickey Thompson Raider made these pie crust slicks again, and they were very tall. So the 456 rear axle ratio kind of behaved like a 370, so it didn't tack out. You could drive it anywhere you wanted. Yeah.
For those of us who might never get the chance to, can you describe what it feels like to make a wide open wheels up pass in an altered wheelbase car?
Yeah, well, I will say this, we've all seen the pictures and stuff, and the reality is wheel stands, except for things like the Little Red Wagon and Hearst Hemi under glass, Hearst Hemi under glass, not their aerials, but those are something that's usually avoided because it A, screws up your pass, and B, really, really hurts the car, unless it's built to do it. So, but a little momentary dangle of the tires is okay. In my case, the nose would come up about 1.5 feet, 2 feet. So, all right, you do your burnout, you'd stage the car, and then when the lights came down, you just have your number one is pushed in. And again, a full manual valve body in any automatic is something I always go for because you don't mess around kickdowns, junk like that. Plus, you can shift. And with a torque flight, it's a cable operated valve body. So when you push 2 or drive, you get it right away. There's no delay because the line pressure is increased. So, okay, so the light comes down, you have your thumb on 2, don't push it yet. Hit the gas, release the brake, off you go. You come up, keep the wheel straight. It settles. When you see the tach going at 61.2, push 2, settles right down, starts going straight, and you just watch the tach, put your thumb on drive, the biggest button, the bottom one, 6 o'clock position, push that one at 62, and then just go through the lights, nothing to it. When the one time it did go wrong was, that car was funny. If I took the exhaust off, it would pick up probably another 20 horsepower, but more than that, would become lighter by 50 pounds. It was a one-piece exhaust, 2 mufflers with 4 tips, all welded as one unit. I could undo that. And then I did a burnout, and it jumped up and came smashing back down. I was like, wow, okay, don't do that when you leave. Well, the damage was done. I didn't know. We're at Lebanon Valley. This is probably it would have been probably 2009, somewhere around. I'd already moved back to Massachusetts, and I've been here in North Brookfield for the last 11 years. So 2009. So anyway, I brought the thing to Lebanon Valley, one of the first trips back here to a track, and trailered it up there, because that from my house is about 100 miles one way, and wide race and break it and push it home, that whole thing. So anyway, I did the burnout, and without the exhaust on the car, it came up, smashed back down. So I staged the car. The brake pedal felt spongy. It was kind of weird. Whatever. I'm in the heat of the moment. Let's run this thing. Light comes down, up I go, push the buttons. Everything's cool, but it just feels kind of weird. Through the traps we go, and I hit the brakes, and they're really spongy, and the wheel feels really sloppy. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? It's slowing down. Things are cool. I turn left, and the engine shuts off. What had happened was, when I went up, the front leaf springs came down so hard they both broke at the eye. The only thing that kept the front axle from swinging down on the rear shackle pivots was the braided steel brake lines, which served as drop resistors. I made the pass. It was like 1130 at 117 on broken springs. And the reason the engine shut off at the left, so when I turned left, the steering crossbar rubbed against the crank trigger on a harmonic balancer, thereby shutting it, munched the teeth and shut the engine off. Because ordinarily with the axle in its normal spot, but when it broke, it moved the axle back about 2 inches, close enough to rub the damper and the trigger wheel. So I roll off the track saying, whoa, broken springs. And I went back to a normal. The front tires used to be pushed forward in the wheel opening about 3 inches. It was exaggerated on purpose. Well, it was centered. Like, something's broken. Sure enough, those leaf springs broke. And Detroit Eaton Spring, I love you guys. I sent the springs back to them, and I bought a replacement pair. And we were all kind of up in arms as to what happened. It didn't come down that hard, but it did break the spring. The main leaf snapped at the eye. So anyway, after that, I put it back together, raced it many more times, but put canvas limiting straps so that, because the braided brake lines hung in there. Otherwise, the axle would have flopped on down. I would have smashed down on that mess and wrecked the car. I had a 5-point harness. I would have been, who knows, but all the same, it would have been a bad day. But that was the only time the car frightened me. Otherwise it was fun and predictable.
I mean, you wrote the book on altered wheelbase cars for the street, and in the book, there's a great intro about kind of the history of how this all came to be. And you mentioned picking up the old Superstock magazines when you were a kid. What is it about that, the mid 60s drag racing era that you love so much that kind of sucked you in?
Well, we all know that, hot rodding started in the 20s, but of course, Henry Ford, 1932, the flathead, post-World War II, all those GIs coming home, you go from a tail gun on a B-17 to, pushing a broom and something, you need excitement. So hot rodding was kind of the excitement from after the come down of, World War II. And, as the factories started to get involved by 1955, 6, 7, 8, 9, then, and of course, hot rod encouraged that because they got a lot of advertising in the form of, the hot one from Chevrolet, these full page ads targeted for the first time ever at hot rodders. And of course, the baby boom starts, right after 1961, too. I think 5,000 people a day were getting their drive, or more than that. It was massive. So, and Pontiac, as we all know, caters to this new youth market with this thing called a GTO. And of course, the Mustang is right on its heels, etc. So for me, basically the fact that high performance cars graduated from being transportation units to fun machines, you can have both. And so anyway, for me, when the factory started messing around in factory experimental, which was NHRA's showcase for the engineers to have some fun and match engines and bodies that never happened normally, that's when I said, this is going to get crazy. And I mean, in hindsight, I'm looking at this, but the FX cars and the Superstockers to me were the beginnings of the factory going drag racing, and aluminum fenders, aluminum bumpers, fiberglass hoods, fiberglass doors, which are not very good on the side impact, but that was before the days of legislation. But the 63 Galaxy lightweight plastic doors, wow, amazing. So just the exoticness of things that looked so normal but ran so fast was what attracted me. And then when the wheelbase alteration started, which was kind of a response to the poor traction of the old hard slicks, Chrysler in particular, 1965, moving things forward. And the key with that, as you know, was the NHRA rulebook forbid altering the firewall. So you couldn't move the engine back. That's what they wanted to do, because the best way to get more traction is to put weight on the tires. And the best way to do that is to move the heaviest thing in the car, the engine, as far back as you can. Volkswagen is a great example of traction, to take the extreme. But because they couldn't mess with the firewall, I said, well, the rule book doesn't say let's move the wheels closer to the engine, which is what they did. That's what the funny car thing's about. And a lot of folks, well, they did that to do wheelies. No, that wasn't their plan at all. And the early funny cars were very good at hazing the slicks and getting nearly full adhesion and finally using the power, like a 427 Ford Thunderbolt. If you watch one of those come off the line in an old picture, often there's a lot of tire smoke, probably a good 3/4 goes away. Whereas the automatic, particularly max wedges, were usually pretty good. And then of course the altered wheelbase thing was good enough for everybody to copy. The Brutus GTO, Lou Arrington, Jungle Jim, to me is one of the most beautiful funny cars on the planet. And I did a model of it way back when. And just, the GTO with the altered wheelbase effect, anything with an altered wheelbase to me looks more dynamic. Like the suspension is jumping out from under the car. It's so fast, the car can't keep up. And I mean, to me, like an altered wheelbase GTO has presence, more presence than any other car ever could. There's something about it. Just stands taller, and it becomes almost a zip code, a city there. And the name on the side and the graphics, if done right, can become almost like a meal, like an addictive. They're larger. I don't know if I'm the only one who sees this. Like the Ramcharger 65 Dodge was a religion. It wasn't just a car, So that was to me the thing. And so to put that back into circulation the best I could by doing the match bash street driven funny car thing was a pleasure, and to some degree it's taken off, I guess, but I don't know, I hope people like it. But I do like to say that they're not gassers. A lot of folks say, well, that's great gasser you got there. Well, gassers, as you know, are generally 55 Chevys, 32 Fords, Willis, and that kind of thing. But a GTO with the nose up in the air is more, well, to me, more, if it's done properly, more of an FX or a match bash car than a gasser, because a lot of them didn't even run gasoline. They ran alcohol, nitro, and there's a lot of ways to do it. But most folks may see an axle, it's a gasser, kind of.
We talked about that when we built our Week to Wicked Nova. We call, you were there, and we called it a gasser because that was the term that everybody understood. That was the term. If you were searching for Nova, a straight axle Nova, you would search for Nova gasser. And so that's what we called it. But we did have a conversation about that where it wasn't really a gasser. It would have been, in fact, a street freak or a AFX car or modified production or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny too, trying to impose rules is the opposite of hot rodding, but at the same time, a little discipline goes a long way, and to me, I kind of got I was like the soup Nazi, Jerry Seinfeld, of funny cars for a little while. I did, oh gosh, I did this, I've not regretted many things I've done, but there was one thing I did in Hot Rod magazine. It was a gasser roundup, and it truly was. It was about gases. I intentionally kept, some guy says, hey, I got a great 65 Coronet altered wheelbase car. Well, let's keep it out because we don't want to perpetuate the idea that gassers and match racers and funny cars are the same. But I did this thing where the cars were there, but so many of the cars were so right, except for just one or two things, like, billet Moroso valve covers on a retro tri-carb small block or something like that. Oh, dude. And it's often because people, just weren't fully tuned in yet for something. So I did this thing, what's great and what greats. I rated each car, and I gave, I crapped on people's cars in print. I kind of felt bad about that, because I know this idiot who has an 81 Ford Fairmont altered wheelbase car. That's me. So some would say, who are you to talk about anything? So that's one of the problems of being a rider. You just, but yeah, that whole thing about the gassers, what's great, what greats, that I wish I could take away. But anyway.
There is something to be said for the preservation of history, as this goes down the line, primary sources kind of disappear. And so if those of us who are sort of entrusted with that history, if we don't have the discipline to get it right, then it won't ever be right again.
That's a good point. Somebody says, well, who's going to be the gatekeeper of this stuff? And, often self-appointed gatekeepers aren't much fun to be around. And I never try to be that guy. But it is true. There needs to be that thing. I remember Ray Baskerville had a great thing. He would often say that a well-done hot rod has to have a singular theme and no sour notes. He loved jazz music, great. And it's kind of like his personality. But he said, stay away from sour notes and mixing metaphors, like putting a sunroof on a Woody, or suede interior. in anything. Oh, I didn't say that. No, now suede's cool. It's comfortable, but just mixing it, like, weld wheels or super tricks on, a flathead 32 Ford,
Yeah.
it's just sour notes. But some people, hey, I like these wheels, or more than that, I have them. I can't afford better. I'm using them. I get that too, so.
There's a fine line to walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I know this idiot with a Ford Fairmont. So, I keep saying that.
I feel like that car, when I look at your funny Fairmont, it's sort of a postmodern kind of thing. Like, I know that this isn't right. If anybody can tell you that this isn't right, I know that it isn't right, but by God, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that was, I did the Chevy, the Wilshire Shaker, and then I said, I want to do a second car. And by that point, I'd left Hot Rod, but I bought a 63 Dodge Dart. I said, I'm going to do a Mopar funny car. And you can't touch a 65 or 4 two-door post B body for under 10 grand. So I thought, well, I'm going to get a Dodge Dart. Plus, there's a history of Dodge Dart funny cars, 63 and 4s. So I did the Rampage, which you may remember. It was in some magazines. But the Rampage was my Mopar. And I said, okay, now it's time to do a Ford. Now, for me, being the soup Nazi that I am, with the funny cars, the only Ford you do has a 427 Cammer for an engine, because that was Ford's nuclear weapon for match racing. The FE pushrod engine was there, but but if you wanted to be serious, you had a Cammer if you were blessed by the factory. And then what to put that in? Well, okay, a 64 or 5 Fairlane or Falcon or Fastback Mustang. But again, finding the core, it was just strike three, and let alone finding a Camry. So I says, well, how about we take the Camry's grandson, the 4.6 4-valve Romeo, or whatever you want to call it, which is now an antique, made obsolete by the Coyote, etc. Says, okay, let's use that engine instead and put that into something that's spiritually similar to a two-door post Fairlane or Falcon. Fairmont.
In just a minute, we ask Steve about some of his favorite moments in automotive history. But first, to see pictures and videos of Steve's cars and everything else we've talked about today, visit the Toolbox, our automotive blog. Find it at speedwaymotors.com by clicking the Toolbox link on the front page. We'll also post a few to Facebook and Instagram. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have, captive sort of encyclopedic knowledge with you, and I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what is your favorite story from the history of drag racing? Or at least one of your top 10 favorite stories from the, wild and crazy history of drag racing.
I'm a Mopar guy at the core. Again, because Jungle Jim ran a Hemi in his Camaro, and his Vega, it can't be all bad. But no, I love them all. I absolutely do. And back in the 80s, there was a lot of this, Mopar, no car, and Chevy rules and that whole thing. And people actually fight about that stuff, and I will say the compact, sport compact craze of 1998-ish, like that,
right,
unified a lot of people into, if it's got rear-wheel drive and it's American as a V8 or even a V6 turbo, it's a great car. So I'm over that whole Mopar and no car thing, but I do appreciate Chrysler. So I will say that the NHRA's treatment of Chrysler, particularly in super stock and pro stock, the old, if you can't beat them, outlaw them, it's unfortunate, And I will say too, that it all feeds into the March 1963 General Motors anti-racing edict. And as you know, GM at that point, I think, controlled 70% of the domestic car market, and antitrust legislation was coming its way. And that's a fact. So GM, I think they said they have meetings, I'm sure, and lower the periscope in every way, get away from attention, because it's going to come at us. So racing was one of the high-profile things they could sort of put a lid on and maybe avoid the breakup, and it never came to breakup, but it was close. Anyway, so by cutting its own throat, so to speak, and canceling the Hemi programs that General Motors really did have for the Chevy small block, the Pontiac 280, 421, Oldsmobile, the OW43, stuff like that. If General Motors had really gone out, they would have had stuff that would have made the Hemi and the Camry look silly, and we would have had a true nuclear war, a great one, for V8 people. But because GM did that in 63, they were kind of an underdog. And at the same time, they also got favor from General Motors and NASCAR, because they were the vehicles that most people owned and came to see race. So when a Chrysler won too much, they would get spanked. So that's maybe a thing in history that I thought was kind of unfair. It's not always the quickest, bestest car that gets to win. It can be handicapped out of existence if it wins too much and it's not popular. That's a bummer, but it's true. and I would say, I guess one anecdote that I had, one great thing about writing at Hot Rod for those 77 issues and many, many after as a freelancer and other magazines is getting to meet people that were legends. I bought Bill Jenkins a beer one time at the PRI show. I wanted to yell at him for being mean to the Hemi with that small block Vega, that thing in 71 that destroyed Pro Stock. They didn't make any of those, but NHRA gave him a big, big, big pass, and that kind of screwed things up, but that's okay. But another thing too is the Michigan Madman, E.J. Potter. As we all know, he was the guy who I think in 61 too made it a small block Chevy with Hilborns to a Harley Davidson frame and went exhibition riding all over the planet, Australia, England. So at one point, I was at Hot Rod Magazine. Got a letter from E.J. Potter saying, "I've written a book. Would you like to review it?" "Yes, sir." So he sent me the book and a video and stuff. So we became like buddies almost in a way. I was calling on the phone and stuff. I was trying to get him on Leno one time. It almost happened because he would have been a natural, because that guy would tell a funny story and Leno would have soaked it up. Of course, Leno was still on TV at that point, not doing his car thing, but still the Tonight Show. And it would have been wonderful to get him on there, but it didn't happen. But anyway, Potter said to me, "Hey, I'm going to be at Moroso at the NMCA races. Will you be there?" "Yes, I will," because Hot Rod covered NMCA. So I said, "Well, let's do a photo shoot on your bike." And the people at Moroso Raceway Park would not let him run down the track as an exhibition, I guess for fear that then a 67-year-old guy on a V8 bike might be an accident. Although he was still very sharp. Everything's cool. But they said, "You can go off to the back 40 if you want with your camera and do your little story." "Fine, thank you very much." So I did that. Well, we meet, and he's got the Widowmaker, which is the name of that thing. I think it was number 3 at that point, in the back of a pickup truck. And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at the chain, and I realized the master link on the chain doesn't have the clip or the outer link. It was just the U-shaped component without the thing to make it stay put. And I said, EJ, and I pointed to him. I didn't say anything. I'm thinking, here's this writer kid embarrassing, this legend. And instead of saying, "Hey, get out of here," he went, "Keep looking. Keep looking." That's what he told me. "Keep looking." In other words, find more, because thank you. He said that would have been the world's worst ass whooping. That's what he said. The chain, if that came off, it would have been. So the crazy thing, he didn't have a link. So they put the word out on the PA system, and some Kawasaki bases or something. A drag bike guys had the right item. I guess the chain's rather universal. So we put that show went on literally just for me. We went down to the back. I laid on my stomach, motor drive, on my film camera, no digital then. And here he comes at me, woo, sideways, and click, 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 click. And that story wound up in sometime probably 2002 or something like that, Hot Rod Magazine. So it was a full feature, and it was wonderful to be able to help E.J. Potter kind of, get his book sales going on, and just to be his buddy kind of in a way, and Pete Millar for that matter. He was also making something of a comeback with his illustrations. The Laugh Your Asphalt was the name of his business, Laugh Your Asphalt, and not always so PC, Pete there, but his stuff was funny. And I did all I could to sort of put that back and give him stuff. And Rodden at Random was a place where we could sort of, give people a little kiss on the cheek if they had something that was selling or whatever. So it was nice to be able to meet Pete Millar and his widow later, because when he passed, but she kept going with that stuff. And I think she might still be doing it. But anyway, so yeah, just I guess those are a few things that come to mind. There's dozens, hundreds of, meeting Richard Petty, going for a ride around his neighborhood in a Challenger. He's driving him in the backseat with a film guy, and he's showing the house where his girlfriend and he eloped from when he was like 17, or, so yeah, just, the car magazine biz, you won't get rich unless you're a publisher or something like that. But the things you'll experience are amazing. And I imagine today's internet realm, it's probably the same deal, I would guess. The paper thing was more formal, and it was if you were on the bus and you had the ability to say, "Steve Mignani calling from Hot Rod Magazine," the doors would open wide and you could do amazing things. The proving grounds and engineering departments at Detroit was another place that was amazingly open, and seeing things like a 4-wheel steer IROC Z or a twin-engined Chevy Citation at General Motors, just stuff like that nobody would see, or a BMW V12 powered Caprice that they were evaluating the drive-by-wire system on. So I put those things in the magazines as often as I could. So it was great to have that kind of access for a little geeky kid from little Westfield, Massachusetts, growing up, to have that kind of experience. It was good.
Well, you wrote one of my favorite pieces of automotive journalism ever, the story of the rocket drag axle. I had no idea that such a thing existed. And I think that that's why it's one of my favorites, because it's just such a bizarre thing. What is it? Can you describe what it is first?
Yeah, well, the thing with that was a Florida, I think an aerospace engineer, decided that he could basically take some of the propellants and chemicals and items that he'd been exposed to in his realm as an aerospace guy. I forget his name, but he was eventually convicted of mail fraud. But anyway, yeah, the turbonic drag axle. That's right. There were two ways that went. He had one system that was purely thrust, and the other one was actually a device that bolted to a specific type of rear axle that had a built-in turbine that would start spinning like mad when two chemicals, I think it was, were combined and began to burn. And a white plume of gas would come out. In the process of making that pressurized gas, it would spin turbines that were then, through this mechanical thing, connected to your differential. And that was the turbonic drag axle. And so that was built, I've seen a couple in reality, but it seemed to me almost like it was a hoax. But there absolutely were some. Remember Joey Chitwood? It said Joey Chitwood, it was a 65 Chevelle Z16, an SS396, one of the 201 or whatever, the small number of cars. And it was painted white and converted into a thrill show drag axle car. And that was real. And they hung that thing by its rear bumper by a crane. It was actually a photo they took of showing that thing and laying out exactly how the turbonic axle bolted to what looked like a Hallebrand, I think, of full floating axles. And so 12 was long gone. But supposedly, similar kits were sold by mail order to people who wanted to buy them. So that was the whole thing. You could send $5 for the catalog. And there was a guy, when I was at Hot Rod, that whole story came out of a guy that sent me his original drag axle catalogs, which were incredibly rare. And so I photographed the heck out of those, put them in the magazine, part of that story. But that was the story of that. And I think by 1970, there were some crashes and stuff. And I think, it was dangerous. So I think he started collecting money and not selling the stuff. Something happened. So it was ended in disgrace, but a great idea in a way. Although, I guess the idea was you could technically drive your car around and then put it in neutral and then pull the pin and whoosh, off you go down the track. And there was even a Volkswagen Beetle, a little primered Beetle that ran and crashed. Yeah, that was one of my last. It was probably when I wrote that, would have been 2003 or 4, toward the end of my tenure at Hot Rod. But after 77 issues, I was done. Most people go about 2-3 years at Hot Rod, and they go. I did 7. So
yeah. And so now, but present day, you've got a lot on your plate. You're the voice of Barrett-Jackson for one thing, right? Like,
yes, in a way, I'll put it like I would say this. Well, Chris Jacobs or Mike Joy are certainly, I'd call them the voices. But yeah, for 16 years, Mike Joy and I, Mike, if you listen to the Daytona 500 on Fox, he's the guy who, you're the winner. That's Mike Joy.
Right.
And so he and I, when the cars roll across the block, we have about 4 minutes per car to say something about them that's hopefully not a guess, and like I said, we give the car a voice, and then on to the next one, on to the next. So I've been doing it for 16 years, and we'll be again in Houston, Texas. Houston in September when the next show hits. Yeah.
And so of course then Roadkill, Junkyard Gold, on Motor Trend. Yeah. Where did the idea for that come from?
I'll tell you, you're not supposed to talk about dirty laundry, but I'm going to, for years and years, I've always loved going to the junkyard. See, when I moved to California from Massachusetts, Massachusetts, I got to there and there were these pickup parts, self-serve junkyards. You pay $1, go in there with your tools and buy the fender or whatever it is, flat rate, $30 for the hood, $63 for the axle, whatever it was. But in the yard, you would see an astonishing array of rust-free, clean California vehicles that once they went into that yard would be picked for 30 days, the bones would be crushed, and a whole new group would come to replace them. And it didn't happen once or twice, it happened thousands of times. And in other words, Southern California, a lot of people were cleaning out their yards and continue to do so. And it was just an unending car show. But it was also tragic because these cars are, when they went in, they didn't come out. You could sort of buy a car, but they made it really hard. $100 per car, they had to move. And if they had a title or not, they made it hard. As you know, the crush campaigns, of Unical were another thing, trying to get clunkers, gross polluters off the road. So it was sad and wonderful at the same time. But anyway, so junkyards, great place to go hot rodding. So over the years, especially in hot rod, it didn't like junkyard spotters guides, and they were always popular with the readers, although sometimes advertisers weren't happy. They'd say, hey, look, this junkyard stuff's eating up pages. You could have done a piece on our headers. And we said, well, hang on now. These guys are going to buy the headers to put on, your headers to put on these junk engines. So, okay. Yeah. You're kind of a tough sell with the publisher of these junkyard things. But I did a thing called the Junkyard Crawl in Carcraft for a good 10 years. And then people seemed to like it. So after I left the magazines, I said, someday, just let's go back into the junkyard and bring a camera. So I created about a half-hour long pilot out of my own pocket, spent $5,000. And this is about 7 years ago. And I pitched that to Speed Channel, Velocity Channel, and a variety of other places, and nobody got it. They said, it's too teachy, and our viewers don't want to see that. That's when I says, I think you're the problem, because a lot of companies are run by folks who maybe aren't qualified to run them. A lot are, but for whatever reasons, they didn't get the charm of a junkyard show. They didn't see it. They didn't get it. Maybe enough yelling, whatever, that whole thing. So I finally said, hey, Dave Freiburger, he was at Roadkill, of course, dominating. Ruling the world. I sent it. He goes, it's pretty good. Let's give it a try on Motor Trend on Demand. So they did, and it was popular. So by way of David Freiburger and his vision, the Junkyard Gold or Junkyard Crawl became Roadkill's Junkyard Gold. Fine with me. I'll be under his umbrella any day. And we did 3 seasons, 31 episodes, and then it was canceled. So it's over, for now. Yeah, a lot of folks, they come up, hey, I love that show. I said, well, it's the last show we did was 2 years ago. And, but I mean, you can see my weight get up and down and stuff like that. So, I can tell there. But there's 31 episodes, and you can see them mostly on Motor Trend, certainly, and then Motor Trend on Demand. And there's 31 of them. So go dig if you want to see them. But there's no more planned. Although my personal realm, I have a YouTube channel. I'm just sort of crawling to get started. And I'm certainly going to be doing more junkyard stuff. Okay. And maybe return the thing. And I can do it. It's not theirs. Like, I'll call it Junkyard Silver or Zinc or something, But it was a tough thing to get on the air. I was shocked and surprised, that nobody did it first,
Well, and there's something so kind of universal car person about that, where you look at a finished car and it's either I love the way that guy did that, or I would have done it differently. But looking at a carcass in a junkyard, it's just a blank canvas, and so to hear you talk about, oh, this is how I would build it, and then to be able to say, oh, well, this is how I would build it, and sit there and watch that sort of repeat, it's the same thing that you would do if you were walking through the junkyard yourself. And I think that's a really relatable, cool thing. I enjoyed the show.
Yeah, the vicarious thrill of discovery.
Yep.
And I say it's like diving on the Titanic without the water, without the sharks, the thrill of, and I say there's no need. They say, well, we're going to restore these cars, right? I say, oh, you think so? Because, the first and fastest way to destroy an automotive show is to start restoring or building. The budget goes insane. Yeah. Volunteers run after the first couple of days. They don't come back. They don't show up anymore. They're gone. The B team. If you're not paying people, they don't stick around. I get it. People have to work. So I say, you don't have to touch them. Just look at shine a light on this thing, an expert eye, and describe what it is and what it is not, and move on. No need to buy it and flip it. Or I think a lot of shows go wrong when they say, well, let's take it, let's go flip it. Then the show slows down, and who cares? I think just identifying the cars that's what people like. That's what I like. So hopefully more of that stuff down the road. Maybe Motor Trend. I don't know if I can convince them again. We'll see what happens.
To make sense of Steve's encyclopedic knowledge of automotive history, it's worth noting that throughout our conversation, he was sitting at his table surrounded by a few stacks of books. Some of them are huge volumes full of detailed information. Behind him, there are shelves with dozens more. Watching the show, you pull just out of thin air, out of your head, production numbers and option codes and things like that. How do you do that?
Well, okay, I'll tell you. I mean, if you watch me at Barrett-Jackson for the last 16 years, I'll have like these little guys here. These are notepads, and I don't know. I mean, I can remember. I told you I'm not great at math. I'm good at thinking and stuff, but I can't remember paint codes or production numbers. But I know when they're important, and I know where to look when I have to have them. So what I do at Barrett-Jackson is for the week before we even go there, I sit and I look at the docket and I pick some things I'm going to say about the car, some research, and have it in my notepad. So at the show I'm reading, and I never hide. I say, hey, prepare, go, read, do. So in the junkyard show, I was to go there 3 days before anybody showed up with a camera, and I would look at the cars and then come up with a theme, bunch of cop cars, bunch of muscle cops and robbers, and the trouble sometimes was what to leave out, because there's so many cool things, but they like to theme. In other words, in this episode, all 4-doors or all wagons or whatever it would be, because it was easier for them to describe and program, honestly, and put on the TV guide kind of thing. And he goes, well, Steve goes to the junkyard again. Okay, well, where's the theme? So that was kind of a weird thing, but it was a good idea. They came up with that. At first, I was just wandering, and there was no form, but that's okay. It was okay by me, but at the same time, it was problematic. Yeah. So I absolutely would go in there, and I would have my stuff prepared before we went to each car. So preparation, oh yeah, and I will never say, oh, just comes naturally. No, I look up that stuff, and sometimes you get it wrong. Or one thing, sometimes at night, you're out in the middle of nowhere, there's no internet connection. And you're like, oh crap. Yeah. I sometimes travel with books, but 60 pounds of books walking to the airport, it gets old. So but yeah, there's preparation for sure. And I always say that, fill your library before you fill your garage.
Yeah.
And same thing goes with the TV show. And anybody who goes and tries to give a car a voice who wasn't the designer of that car, you're going to screw up. It's going to happen. So skip that part and just study before you go in.
Right. What does your reference library look like?
I have a whole other room of magazines and books, and I just I stay current. But one of my favorite things are these like American car guides and stuff like that, because they give you production numbers and things like this deal here, with all that data. And those are the gold mines. And beyond that, of course, dealer brochures are pretty cool, but they take up space. And the dealer brochure, sometimes the information in those is not 100% correct. It's pre-production, and it's always got a sales buzz around it. So reading through that to get to the brake drum diameter can sometimes take more time than it does with a book, But yeah, research stuff. And the internet's wonderful too, although the internet's, double-edged sword, as is a book. And you try and get like 2 or 3 references that have the same conclusion. You say, okay, that's solid. And production numbers, production numbers, I always, sometimes on set, there's a guy holding a hunk of paper just off camera. You'll sometimes see its reflection in my glasses. So a little pro tip, watch my glasses, see the reflection of the stuff in the background,
When we did the Nova, Week to Wicked Nova, and you came out there and joined us in California, you kind of blew my doors off, because it was the car as we drove it in was a 6-cylinder, it was a 67 Nova. We called it a 66 because it had 66 sprint clip on it. But you ran straight without, I didn't see any reference material, ran straight to the VIN and said this car was a V8 car. How did it get a 6-cylinder in it? And I was like, wow, how does he know this? That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty simple, and the thing with that, of course, is on GM products, the third digit of the VIN, if it's an odd number figure, it's a 6 or a 4 in some cases. If it's even, it's typically a V8. That's the quick tell. And the data for that is it's only as far away as like these things. This guy right here, and in these, I mean, there's an order to every one of these things. We can see here, this the Tempest 6 and whatever it is, it's all right there. Yeah. And so I guess I didn't invent that stuff. I use it, but yeah. And when I'm writing, everything slows down. It is kind of funny too. When I was doing more writing than television, it was kind of a problem for the TV stuff, because when you're writing, you can stop everything, walk get the book, come back and sit down. But when you're doing TV, you have to have that stuff either ready to go, top of your head, or just off camera, a place where you can reference it, a big cue card or something like that. Yeah. So sometimes, writing is easier than TV, because if you want to get it right, and you don't want to go so general, like, well, a lot of these cars have V8s. Well, how many? 1,604. Well, why is that a big deal? Sometimes it's not. You leave it out. But if it's, if it's like 2% had V8s, and this makes it a very rare car, well, you want to point that out, and give it some contrast. Give the number, and that drives it home.
I'm going to again put you on the spot with your vast knowledge of all things cars. If time and money were no object, and you could build or buy any car, what would it be?
It wouldn't be a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari or anything like that. I think probably perhaps a 63 Catalina Swiss cheese with all the aluminum. And I want the 3-speed manual, because that's how they actually built them, the early ones, with a specific low first gear cluster. And it was made just for the Super Duties. But anytime that the factories, stopped everything and stamped aluminum fenders, I think the scrap rate of those things was like 60% or something like that, because multiple stamps were required to get the forms and stuff like that. And I guess the metal would begin to tear, so to reduce the load in the presses. So these guys had to stop everything for that stuff, which usually happened at night. And sometimes that meant that the C team was on the job, not the A or the B. And the stuff was kind of raw and raunchy, required little welding to fix up and stuff. But anything that's bizarre, rare stuff that comes out of a mass-produced setting is pretty cool. A hand-hammered Ferrari is pretty cool. It's kind of weird that one side does not match the other, and one door will not fit the next car. That's cool, but it's predictable. It's like pottery. Whereas like GM, when they stop everything to make an aluminum fender or a hood, that's really a whole different thing to me. Also doing things like on those Catalinas, because they were, GM had to work with what they had. And those Catalinas were massive cars, and they were full frame cars. So they actually had The frame, which as you know is the girders underneath the car, that would be cut with big circular holes, the Swiss cheese name. And it was so flexible that they could be harmed while being moved. So they had temporary bits of, I think, 2x4, some sort of wood that fit into the C channel of the frame. It wasn't tie wrapped in, but it was tied in, that so that when they moved the frame around, it wouldn't twist or get warped or messed up or bent. So that's wow. And then when they finally put the thing under the car, just the wood out and put it on there. So just things like that were, going over and above, and all that just to get, praise and ink. And they wouldn't, if they won, like, the super stock eliminators at the 63 World Nationals or something like that. Yeah. All of that to get ink and sell cars, win on Sunday, hopefully sell on Monday.
There was a Hot Rod magazine feature on the Swiss cheese Catalinas, because I have the issue and I have no idea what it is, but I always wondered, looking at that, like, man, how did that thing not just twist up like a pretzel? But it's interesting to hear you say that they had to actually brace it just to move it.
Yeah. And when put together, they were fine, and that's the thing. It speaks to the fact that, if you ever look at pictures of like full frame cars, they were like cordwood frames stacked, but these Swiss cheese ones were so thin that, they could easily be bent, and, why mess it up in process? So they had to take the step of putting wood in the damn thing to, to stick it up. And they probably had a niche line for those as well, Yeah. But anything that's, everybody wants something that's special and unique and cool, and, the super stockers were absolutely like that. The Hemi cars went on together on specific lines where the guys could then put the plastic side windows in them, and the Corning rear windows in the 65 A990s, and let alone the altered wheelbase cars, which were done off-site at a former ambulance factory, Amblewagon. That whole story has been repeated over and over. But just interesting stuff that most people wouldn't recognize. In fact, the car doesn't tell you these things. And I always say that, I love everything about cars except one thing: they don't talk. So it's up to us to give them a voice as best we can and not guess while we're at it.
I'm surprised to hear you say Pontiac and not one of the 65 loophole machine Chryslers.
Well, check in with me in 10 minutes, and it'll be, and I know, it's so. And another thing too that I love is the 65 Holman and Moody overhead cam Mustangs. What a beautiful car. And I have to say that in 66, when they stretched the nose, they got even nicer. I thought they were cool. Like some of the earliest Tasca Ford cars. Again, those were built at Holman and Moody down in North Carolina. John Wanderer, I think, was the project engineer. He's now was a Las Vegas lawyer. And that was, he wandered so far from that early life. He became an attorney, but he also wrote about and took pictures of those days. And he was one of the best sources. I think in the late 90s, John Wanderer sort of blossomed and started writing about and sharing these pictures he'd had for years that showed the Holman and Moody plant with the guys drilling the holes and how crude the cars were, and the punch list of things to be fixed. And the 65 FX Mustangs were one of the Thunderbolts were cool too, but hobbled by that, the push rod 427, the cameras, anything with a Hemi head is amazing to me.
Knowing what you know about the history of the auto industry, what do you see happening in the future, both with new cars and with the old collector car hobby?
Well, I will say that, being born in 57, I was there to see the knee-jerk reactions and the flinches of the early 80s when the V8 is dead, folks. We're done. All about fuel economy. And the wonderful machines that the first Civics and Rabbits were. They showed Detroit how to build a proper front-wheel drive compact car. Good stuff. The Pinto and the Vega were embarrassing by comparison, truly. And that's, they were blown out of the water. But here we go with, the 80s come along, fuel gets a little cheaper, and suddenly the 5.0 is back, and it's great. It's a wonderful thing. And then the SUV comes along. We've unlearned everything about fuel economy because we can get fuel. I'm not judging it in any way, but I'm just saying that we seem to unlearn a lot of stuff. So here we are now in another knee-jerk flinch with the electric cars are coming, folks. And we got to remember, we've been here before. In 1920, steam, electric, and gas were all equally available and popular. So the electric thing is cool. I do understand it takes something to make something, and to create the electricity to, you got to burn some coal or something, hopefully solar or nuclear. I like nuclear. It's okay as long as you can get rid of the junk properly. That's the big problem. But I like the electric thing. And I think that Tesla is brilliant in the way that they're making electricity fun and cool, rather than, the Prius, it was a hybrid, and they kind of went green with that. Just fine, green's cool, but that's a good way to turn off the knuckle draggers like me. I'm half knuckle dragger and half advanced, whatever. But the Prius was kind of a boring thing. Well, the Tesla thing, that whole vibe with the ludicrous speed and the dual engine cars, which will absolutely keep up with the Hellcat. That's a great way to sell. You can never sell an old man's car to a young man, but you can sell an old man's car to a young man's car to an old man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So by making the electric thing fun and exciting, Tesla has really rocked it. And Ford, of course, is taking the bait, a Mustang, but the Mustang has these three different modes. There's unbridled, there's corralled, and, I mean, they're marketing things, but they're also very real. They push this button, the thing, Paul's button, push that one, it's gentle.
Yeah.
And so I think the future does, more electricity, but is gas going away? I don't, it'll be a long time because they're still selling, $90,000 SUVs with 6-year notes.
Yeah.
And that means 6 years of gas. Got to have that. They're not stopping that. So, gas is, it's the most efficient thing. I mean, you get so much energy out of this little cup of liquid, look what it does. And reciprocating engines may be inefficient, but we've come so far in cleaning them up. But, and they also apparently in some cars in LA, the exhaust is cleaner than the air going in. So they're that good at scrubbing emissions. So, we're being irresponsible in a very responsible way, in the last many years. So I think gasoline engines are here for a while longer. And the electric thing, I think I heard that GM was talking about being all electric within 8 years.
Yeah.
I will say Edsel, you can about face immediately on anything. It doesn't seem to be working. My big question is, if you look out the door at a traffic jam, if all of those cars suddenly had to recharge at the same time, when you're ready to do that, that's when the electric car becomes a very real proposition. In the meantime, it's still not there,
The infrastructure isn't there to support it.
That's right. That's right. When every gas station also has an equally efficient charging part, then, we'll be on our way. But right now it's still, I was at a hospital last week, getting X-ray on my shoulder. Things are fine. But there was a juice, what they call a juice bar. It was a Tesla juice bar. It was actually marketed. It was a charging station for 3 cars. That was it. And the whole parking lot had, hundreds of spots, 3 spots. And 3 Teslas were there with MD plates on them, but that's it, three charging systems. So I think, when we can charge them at a much greater rate, then they'll be a real thing. And I'm fine with them. They're okay. They make torque, they're fast, they're quick,
People talk about, I mean, you were talking about the gas crunch, at 73, when everybody, hot rod guys, muscle car guys, race guys are like, oh man, what are we going to do?
Selling the Hemi Cougars for $800. I mean, getting rid of the Hemi because but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, my dad sold his 455 GTO for that reason. He didn't think he could afford to put gas in it anymore. And so then you hear some of that now, like among enthusiasts, well, what if I can't get gas for my Hemi Cuda, or what if I can't get gas for my C10 truck? I mean, is that something that you worry about or have a feeling about?
Well, it's a good point. Money will solve everything. You know what I mean? I think it is possible that, 2010, it won't be any sooner, but it's possible that you'll have to go to the boutique and buy gasoline for your piston vehicle. But at this point, there's so many of them, and not just Hemi Cougars, but there's workers who get to work every day in their old Chevy pickup. It's got gasoline. So, and there's strength at the bottom rungs of the economy. Folks who are laborers. I was one, and I kind of still am, and as long as those folks need gasoline to power their cars they can't afford to buy electric, they're going to be fed. So, I'm not too worried about it, and even if, I mean, in a worst case scenario, there we are in, 2039 or something like that, and you got to go buy a jug of, a big drum of gasoline. I think the market is, people are not going to throw away their investments. There are millions of collector cars on this planet that run on gasoline. The market will request, and the system will supply. It'll just come down to how much it costs for a gallon,
The thing that I sort of liken it to, when I went to college the first time, I was an art student and I did a lot of photography, and this was early 2000s. Art photography was black and white, and I could walk into 2003, 4, I could walk into Target and buy a roll of black and white film, and it was right there next to all the color film, And now, of course, you can still get black and white film. I can still shoot it, but I have to go to the camera store, which is across town, to get it. That's the analogy that I always sort of.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have anything else? Any other points that you'd like to make, or plugs for anything that you're working on?
I guess, yeah. I do have a podcast called the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show, and what I do is basically read from my 1001 Muscle Car Facts book, and between each fact, I'll stop and say, I chose that fact because, and oh, by the way, there's also another, since I wrote that, this is surface. So since October, we got about 50,000 followers, which is nice, and we were down for about the last couple of months. My partner Chris Roberts, his daughter had a health thing, so we kind of shut down for a little while. but we're going to get back into action within the next couple of weeks. So that's happening. And beyond that, if you get a chance, tune into Motor Trend either on demand or the Motor Trend channel to see Steve Magnante's Supermodels. No, I'm not hanging around with Christy Brinkley, but there's actually 4 episodes where Motor Trend came to me, which is wonderful, about a model car show. So there's 4 episodes where I built 4 models, one of which is Jimmy Addison's Silver Bullet, the 67 GTX Street Racer in 1/25th scale. So if you get a chance, check out Steve Magnante's Supermodels. And of course, as always, on the Motor Trend app and also on the cable, check out Roadkill's Junkyard Gold when it airs. They rotate it from time to time, but on the app, you can see it any old time. There's 31 episodes. And of course, keep an eye out. Well, another thing too, real quick. You might remember Spanky Asseter from the Barrett-Jackson auction. He and his wife, Amy, were kind of the face of the auction for many years. Amy had the long black hair. Sold. She was on the commercials. Pretty gal. Well, he's still very much active, and he's got things Spanky's collector car auctions. Spanky's Freedom Car Auctions in Texas. Well, he's on October 13th, he'll be selling 260 vintage Mopars at no reserve in an online auction. So lots of 300s, letter cars, and a lot of really neat stuff. So if you get a chance, folks, on October 13th and 14th, log on to Freedom Car Auctions if you want to buy a Mopar at no reserve. You might get a deal. So there you go. And also the Steve Magnante YouTube channel. There's a bunch of videos there that I've done walking around these Mopars in the Texas prairie. And there's rattlesnakes too. So check that out.
Little drama.
Yeah, little drama. And I've even thought maybe about, just like maybe a show where we go to museums like yours. Of course, the Speedway, your museum is an astonishing thing. Mm-hmm. I think your place and Garlitz's place and the NHR Museum, probably the 3 of the top 10 on the planet of historical artifacts in one spot. I could see maybe doing a show where just standing next to a Henry Ford prototype, whatever it might be, and then giving the story of it, maybe disassembling it a little bit, and putting it back together nicely. I always, like at Barrett-Jackson some years back, there were a bunch of Corvette Beta builds that were auctioned. And I just would love to have gotten one of those and disassembled it gently to look at like experimental castings and just stuff like that, and put it back together gently, But anyway, something like that could be kind of fun.
Thanks to Steve Magnante for being our guest today, and thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video we referenced in today's episode, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com, and if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.